I recently had occasion to think about the sickest that I've been in my entire life. It was whenever I was incarcerated. I was housed at the California Institution for Men. The prison is more commonly called Chino Prison because it's in Southern California, right outside the city of Chino. Before I go into too great detail about how ill I was and frankly how sick everybody in the building that I was housed in got, I wanted to spend a minute talking about some of the architectural details of the buildings in Chino, or at least on West Yard where I was, because they are unique and they're apropos to the conversation. You have to understand that at the center of the buildings there is a small room, much smaller than a cell. Call it 10 feet by 10 feet. This is the officer's station. This is where they spend most of their time. The walls are thick concrete, easily 6 inches thick, and the door is a solid steel security door. The room is not incredibly comfortable. There's not much room for them to stretch out, especially given the desks and computers and things for the 2 or even 3 officers that work in there all day long. The reason the room is set up like this, so cramped, is because if there is a riot or a natural disaster and the officers need to withdraw to someplace secure, they may not be able to get away from the building itself. There's a lot of distance between the buildings and any kind of main area where the riot squad might be housed. So they can just pull that security door closed, and they have an outside line, I'm sure, to that riot squad, perhaps even the National Guard. I don't doubt they have some hidden weapons, perhaps maps or emergency supplies in this room. It's designed for them to be safe in the event of an emergency. The rest of this concrete wall, of course, you don't have to go through the officer station to get to the rest of it, but the inmate restroom adjoins it, as in if you banged on the wall, you'd be able to hear it in the officer's station. The inmate restroom is again secured by a thick steel security door on either side, and you can walk through it to get from one side of the living area to the other. On the far wall, there are 7 sinks, 6 normal ones, and a hot sink, which is a unique thing to dormitory living. It sprays out scalding hot water so you can blast a soup or make a cup of coffee in just a couple of seconds. Additionally, there are, well, it's a restroom, so there are 8 toilets, 4 in a row and 4 in a row, and then 2 urinals where you can stand because it's a men's prison. And then off to the other side, there's, 6 shower heads and a drain so that the room wouldn't flood. I'm going into these details just to express that this room with thick concrete walls and poor ventilation that is secured by 2 big steel doors almost all day long has 6 showers running all the time and 8 toilets that are so close together and have, of course, nothing between them. There's no privacy. Don't be imagining walls and partitions. This is a prison. If you're sitting and using the restroom and you realize that you forgot toilet paper, which I imagine has happened to every person who has to take toilet paper to the restroom at some point in their life, you can say, "Hey Frank, can I use your toilet paper? Can you hand me some?" And Frank might be sitting right next to you. You go, "Yeah, sure." Or Frank's neighbor could, because it's only right there. He could, "Yeah, sure." Or one more toilet down, because again, 4 in a row, quite easily, he wouldn't even have to stretch, could just reach over and hand you his toilet paper. But they're rows, so the guys behind you, absolutely, one of them could just reach behind his back and hand it to you too. So on down the line. There's 7 other people. It's, I suppose, an unspoken benefit of dormitory living, that there's always somebody to hand you some toilet paper or whatever it is that you forgot. This does not make for clean, hygienic areas. It is humid and hot and miserable in there all day long because of the running showers. And not everybody washes their hands. I know everybody likes to pretend like they do, but we all know the numbers. There's at least a couple of guys that just don't do it ever. And it just takes that couple of guys to spread disease, plague, and nastiness all over a dorm, because this is a dormitory. I heard these places are described as military housing, and I understand why, because they remind me of the old Quonset-style military barracks. Outside of this concrete area where The cops could retire if there was a riot where the inmate restroom facilities are located and they need to be plumbed and whatnot. Everything else is made of wood. It's temporary structures is what they call it. This is interesting because Chino, West Yard, the place where I was housed in 2013, 2014, burnt down in 2009. They rioted, they hurt each other, and they lit that place on fire. You see, Chino, West Yard, is a medium security yard. Almost all of the wooden buildings in CDC and probably in the country, they're minimum security. It's guys who don't have violent crimes, weren't involved in gangs, hopefully won't burn the place down. In 2009, whenever I was at SADF, I remember hearing about them burning Chino down, and it was just an incredible moment. Years after the riot, the fire that happened in 2009, and after they'd repaired the damage, I ended up living on this yard. In 2013, 2014, we had a particularly bad summer cold come through the buildings. A summer cold isn't a big deal, though it is just a little bit worse in an open-air dormitory environment like this, because in the summer it's hot, in the winter it's cold. And again, this was Chino, California. By hot, I mean 100 degrees, perhaps more, and I mean indoors. So if you have a cold, a fever on top of that, it makes things just that extra little bit miserable, especially if you've got 200 guys trying to cohabitate in a small building sharing limited facilities. Colds are common, we've all had them, but many people may not be familiar with a virus called a norovirus. If it does sound familiar and you're not sure why, you may have heard about it on the news. That it is a short-lived virus, just 12, maybe 15 hours, and you are sick, violently ill with diarrhea and vomiting. And it's spread through that. You get so ill that you fail to follow proper hygienic practices, or at least some people do, and as a result, they contaminate the surfaces they touch after they're ill, and then other people get it. Because this is such a fast and violently nasty disease, it shuts down theme parks or cruise ships or things like that occasionally. Any place you have a lot of people crammed into a little area who might get each other sick in just a couple of days. Like a prison. Especially if the restroom area is essentially a petri dish. It's sealed with steel doors and is always hot and humid with no ventilation. I remember my friend Lunar coming by and telling me, "Hey Aaron, Frank down in the corner, he's feeling real sick, like, he's real bad. And I'm worried because I'm starting to feel bad too. Do you think maybe I could be getting what he has?" I, of course, didn't know it was a norovirus, but there are some hallmark symptoms of a disease that's going to spread through a community like that quick. And the violent illness, vomiting and diarrhea, it told a story. I told him, "Man, Lunar, if you're sick now, this might be a rough ride for all of us." And sure enough, the next morning, come 5 a.m. or so, I noticed that there was a line at the bathroom. You see those 8 toilets that are available for inmates and the 2 urinals? They were insufficient for the 30 or so inmates out of the almost 200 that lived in the building who had woken up and found themselves violently ill. So there was a little squabble for whose turn it was in the restroom, and everybody trying to find a place to be. Thankfully, some entrepreneurial inmate or perhaps some sainted guard realized what was happening and reached out to the guys in the kitchen. They sent in a bunch of 5-gallon buckets, the big white buckets like you might keep any kind of random thing that you bought at the hardware store in. That's what food is delivered in prison often. We get our eggs, our potatoes, our pancakes. They all come in big 5-gallon buckets and get cooked on industrial grills. So there's often, 20, 30, 40 of these buckets just available back in the kitchen. And somebody had realized that if those 30 people who were sick, infected the other 100 and something people who weren't as quickly as they had gotten sick, which is exactly what happened. By the middle of the afternoon that day, you had 150 people trying to use 8 toilets. If it hadn't been for the 30 or 40 buckets that somebody had so thoughtfully allowed into the building, which were against the rules, I just don't have a polite way to say that there would have been a bunch of inmates pooping on the floor, because there would have been no other option. It had nothing to do with sanitation, which is something that I'm trying to express. Because even if you were so careful, you kept your hands to yourself and you sat at your bunk all day long and you washed your hands if you anythinged, you still have that big heavy steel door that everybody opens, and you know some of those guys didn't wash their hands, and maybe you shoulder your way past it. But this is a communal living area, and it just takes one guy who doesn't bother. Maybe he blows his nose and doesn't think about it, and they're on his arm and walks past your bunk and brushes your jacket, and there you go, man. You're sick, even though you didn't leave your bedding area, because you reach over and get your book out of your jacket or a pen, and you don't think about it, and you don't go and wash your hands because it's your stuff. You had so many people so brutally ill that it feels strange to focus on my own sickness here. The rule was, if you couldn't anymore, if you reached the point that you were just falling out, you could go into the bathroom and lie down on the floor whenever they counted. I think I saw at least 5 or 6 guys do it in this time period. And if you just lay there, they would have to hit a medical alarm and say, hey, there's something wrong. This guy won't get up off the bathroom floor. He's okay, he's there, but they can't count you on the bathroom floor. They're, as part of their job, verifying that you are in your bed. There's somebody in this bed, somebody in that bed, somebody in the next bed. It's an easy way to make sure that nobody escaped. If you could just mill around at random, they might miss somebody. So they will literally shut the whole program down for somebody lying on the floor saying, I can't stand up, I need help. And then they would bring in medical people, a Stokes litter, lift you up onto a gurney, take you to the medical area of the prison. It's called CTC generally, the Correctional Treatment Center. There, do not get the idea that they are going to move heaven and earth to ensure that you are safe and well. They will certainly take your blood pressure and your temperature, but they know it's a norovirus, they know it's a cold, they know these are the things that everybody else in that area is sick with. Unless you happen to be truly ill, your blood pressure is so bad they're worried for your safety, or perhaps you have a pre-existing condition that means that you could actually die. All they're going to do is leave you on that gurney and put you in a room, tell you to wait it out. So lying down on that bathroom floor, it wasn't a good choice for most people who did it. They didn't get any better treatment. But this was a high-risk medical facility. I was sent here because I had valley fever, coccidiodemycosis. Other people went there for other things. Some people had AIDS in this building. For anybody that had a pre-existing problem like this, I think lying down on that floor was probably a wise choice. To be clear about how sick people were, how bad this was, if at any point you wondered about people lying down on the floor of the bathroom next to those toilets whenever everybody has violent diarrhea and vomiting, you wondered if those floors were clean, nobody cared. If somebody had said, I just don't want to lie down next to that giant pile of nastiness that somebody else didn't clean up properly, I would have told them then they should probably just stay on their bunk because they're not as sick as that other guy that is lying down on the floor. I didn't have the option of lying down on the bathroom floor. I remember telling my boy Lunar, because he was already done, he was feeling better. Hey, if I'm not up in a couple of hours, this is about 10 p.m., and I could tell that I was getting sick, that my fever was spiking from the cold and the norovirus. Come check on me, man. I told him, just give it a couple hours. I'm honestly not sure if he did. I'll assume he did, but he was sick too, and there was a lot going on, and I was legitimately delusional. My last clear memory is of trying to lie down in my bed with my 2 extra blankets wrapped around me tight. And again, it's probably 90 degrees at this point. This is late evening in the middle of summer in Chino. high 80s at least. I got my 2 blankets, my jacket, my socks, my beanie, and I'm shivering. And I'm telling myself I need to find some way to get warm or I'm going to die in my sleep. Which is the point that I start realizing perhaps I'm not rational, perhaps my fever is too bad. This is shortly thereafter confirmed whenever I look at the corner of my bunk and realize there is what I can only describe as a cartoon icicle scaling the side of my bunk, and he looks at me and crawls under the covers, and I start shivering. And I realize that it's the icicles. They're marching along in what I can only describe as a procession, like a marching band from a cartoon, again with a dun, 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 dun. And I can see him coming up the bunk, and I realize I'm having a fever dream, that this is obviously untrue, but I can't stop shivering because I'm so cold. I had thankfully already been through, I guess, the worst of the norovirus at this point, because I didn't soil my bed area. And I promised that it was through no act of self-control on my part, because I had no bodily control. I couldn't have rolled out of bed if I wanted to, much less go to the restroom or ask for help. At some point over the course of the night, I guess I kicked off the blankets, took off the jacket, the fever broke, and I woke up that next morning. I felt born anew. You could breathe. The room still stunk. The building still stunk, but guys were starting to get up 5, 6 a.m. You saw a guy kind of laugh because he realized he felt better, even though he was so sore. Your diaphragm is killing you from the vomiting, and all your muscles ache. But the little slop meal, those eggs that they got out of a 5-gallon bucket and cooked on a grill, that they brought to our building because they didn't want anybody leaving the building since the building was on quarantine. They put out a memo saying nobody is allowed to leave. It was the best stinking meal I'd eaten in so long, and I made good food too, but after that kind of suffering with the empty stomach, you're ready to go, oh my God, this is so good. You heard other guys doing it too. You hear somebody a couple of cells down, a couple of bunks down, saying, these are the best eggs that I've had in a long time. And that same guy who went past the bunk and coughed and snotted and left it in your area like some kind of disrespectful hobo, well, this time he has a clean rag and he's going around cleaning stuff. Not just him, but everybody. Because you feel so much better. It's a sense of renewal. And that is the thing about being sick, and it's something that I thought about a lot as I was recently ill. It's hard, but one of my favorite days, the whole time I did time, is that day after I was sick. Maybe one of my favorite days in my whole life, because everybody in the building was so happy, joyful to be alive. We'd all made it through together. I'm not trying to sell a big sense of community. I guarantee you there was 2 guys trying to beat each other up in the corner a couple hours later. Somebody else ripping somebody else off for heroin, I'm sure. But there was a sense of community, like we'd all made it through the storm together. The cops broke out an extra container of cell block 64, which is an industrial chemical. They call it cell block 64. Cell block because it's supposed to be used in prisons ideally, and 64 because you can take a little bit of it and then dilute it in 64 parts water, and it's still guaranteed to kill a lot of nasty diseases, norovirus included. We handed that out to all the other inmates because I was a porter, and everybody scrubbed their areas. People washed their bedding by hand and hung them out on the line. And it was going to dry fast because Southern California in the summer. As I was sick recently, I reminded myself of something that I'm going to repeat now. When you are ill, this too shall pass. It's not the end of the world. You're going to get better. And ideally, you are going to enjoy life just that extra little bit more for having been sick, for having seen how wonderful it is to be well. And when you are well, This too shall pass. You will be sick again. It's that middle path where we have to accept that there's good and bad. And whenever something is bad, whenever we have that norovirus or whatever plague happens to be sweeping through, well, try and make it through, and try and remind yourself that life's going to be a lot better when you are better. And whenever you're well, really appreciate it. Try not to take it for granted, because it will be taken from you. Thank you for listening today.